25 years.
Out of a lion.
Everything is about to change. The war is no longer coming. It has already begun. David is no longer just running. He is becoming something far more dangerous. And this time, the betrayal will cut deeper than ever before. Because in House of David Season 3, every choice, every battle, and every moment will push David closer to the throne, but at a cost that might break him forever. The story picks up right where everything fell apart. There is no peace left, no safety, no turning back. David is now a hunted man, forced into the shadows, while Saul's rage grows stronger with every passing moment. What makes this even more intense is that Saul is no longer thinking like a king. He is thinking like a man who has already lost everything, and that makes him more dangerous than ever before. And this is exactly where Season 3 begins to pull us in, because we are no longer watching a story about survival, we are watching the beginning of a war. David's journey at this point feels heavier than ever. He is not just running to stay alive, he is running to protect the people around him. And the moment he realizes that Saul will not stop until everything he loves is destroyed, something inside him starts to change. This is the turning point. This is where David stops being just a fugitive and starts becoming a leader. But that transformation does not come easily. Every decision he makes now carries consequences, and every step forward pulls him deeper into conflict. At the same time, the tension between loyalty and betrayal begins to take center stage. The people around David are no longer just followers. They are part of something bigger, something dangerous. Trust becomes fragile. One wrong move, one wrong decision, and everything could fall apart. And that is what makes this season feel so intense right from the beginning. You can feel that something is coming, something that will change everything. Meanwhile, Saul's side of the story becomes darker and more unpredictable. His obsession with finding David is no longer just about power, it feels personal. It feels like he cannot accept the idea that David could rise above him, and because of that, he starts making choices that push him further away from reason. The more he searches for David, the more control he loses over himself, and that creates a dangerous situation where no one around him is truly safe anymore. What makes this even more powerful is how the story builds this constant sense of pressure. There is no moment where things slow down. Every scene feels like it is leading to something bigger. You can feel the war getting closer, the lines being drawn, and the inevitable clash that will decide everything. And in the middle of all this, David is standing at a crossroads. He can continue running, or he can finally face what he is destined to become. And this is where the emotional weight of the story really starts to hit. Because becoming king is not just about victory, it is about sacrifice, it is about loss. And it is about the kind of decisions that can change a person forever. Season 3 is not just telling us that David will rise, it is showing us what he will have to go through to get there. By the end of this opening, one thing becomes very clear. This is not just the continuation of a story, this is the beginning of the end. The war has started, the stakes are higher than ever, and the journey toward the throne is going to be more brutal, more emotional, and more unforgettable than anything we have seen before. As the story moves forward, the sense of danger only grows stronger, and this is where the true scale of the war begins to reveal itself. David is no longer moving aimlessly from place to place. He is starting to gather strength. The men who stand beside him are not just followers anymore, they are becoming an army. Each one of them has chosen to stand with David, despite the risk, despite knowing that standing against Saul means stepping directly into the path of destruction. And this is what makes this part of the story so powerful, because it shows that David is no longer alone. But even as his strength grows, so does the weight on his shoulders. Every man who joins him is another life he feels responsible for. Every battle he chooses to fight could mean survival or complete loss. And this is where the emotional conflict inside David becomes even more intense. Because deep down he knows that the man he is running from is still his king. Saul is not just an enemy, he is someone David once served with loyalty and respect. And that makes every decision even harder. At the same time, the idea of betrayal begins to take a much darker shape. Not every threat comes from the battlefield. Some of the most dangerous moments come from within. Trust becomes uncertain, and the fear of being exposed or turned against starts to grow. The tension builds slowly, making it clear that David's greatest challenges will not just come from Saul's army, but from the people and situations around him. And this is where the story becomes even more gripping, because you start to question who can truly be trusted. Meanwhile, Saul's descent continues to spiral. His anger is no longer controlled, and his actions begin to reflect a man who is desperate to hold on to something that is already slipping away. He becomes more ruthless, more unpredictable, and more willing to cross lines that once defined him as a king. And as he pushes further into darkness, the people around him begin to feel it. The kingdom itself starts to fracture under the pressure of his decisions. This creates a powerful contrast between Saul and David. On one side, you have a king losing everything because of fear and pride. On the other, you have a man gaining everything, but at the cost of constant struggle and sacrifice. And this contrast is what drives the story forward. It is not just about who will win, it is about what each of them is becoming along the way. As the war begins to take shape, we also start to see the larger forces at play. This is no longer just a personal conflict between two men. This is a battle that will decide the future of an entire kingdom. Every move matters. Every decision pushes the story closer to a moment that cannot be avoided. And right in the middle of all this, David continues to change. The boy who once faced giants with courage is now facing something far more complicated. Leadership, responsibility, loss, and destiny all come together to shape him into the king he is meant to be. But the path to that crown is far from easy. By the end of this section, one thing becomes impossible to ignore. The war is no longer just beginning, it is unfolding. The betrayal is no longer a possibility, it is inevitable. And David's rise is no longer a question, it is only a matter of time. But the real question is, what will he have to lose before he finally reaches the throne? And just when it feels like the war could not get any more intense, this is where everything starts to break. Because the deeper David is pulled into this samgharsh, the more complicated his path becomes. It is no longer just about surviving or even winning, it is about staying true to who he is, while everything around him is falling apart. And this is exactly where Season 3 raises the stakes to a completely different level. One of the most powerful parts of this stage in the story is the constant tension between opportunity and restraint. David is given moments, real chances, where he could end everything, where he could finally put an end to Saul's pursuit and change his fate in an instant. But each time he holds back. And that choice is not weakness, it is what defines him. Because for David, this is not just about becoming king, it is about becoming the right king. But that decision comes with consequences. Every time David chooses mercy over action, the danger continues. Saul does not stop, the chase does not end, and the war keeps growing. This creates a powerful inner conflict within David, because he starts to realize that doing the right thing does not always make things easier. In fact, sometimes it makes everything harder. At the same time, the emotional weight of loss begins to hit even deeper. The people around David are no longer just names, they are bonds, friendships, and loyalties that carry real meaning. And as the harb intensifies, the risk of losing those connections becomes more real than ever. Every battle feels heavier, every step forward feels uncertain. And this is where the story truly becomes emotional, not just thrilling. Meanwhile, Saul's downfall continues to accelerate. His choices become more desperate, more reckless, and more dangerous. It is no longer just about defeating David. It feels like he is fighting against his own fate. And the more he tries to hold on to power, the more it slips away from him. This creates a sense of inevitability, as if the story is moving towards something that cannot be stopped. What makes this even more intense is how the gap between Saul and David continues to grow. One is losing control, while the other is learning to control everything around him, even his own desires. And that difference is what slowly shifts the balance of power. Not in a single moment, but through a series of choices that shape who they are becoming. At this point, betrayal also reaches its peak. It is no longer subtle. It is no longer hidden. The lines between friend and enemy begin to blur, and the cost of trust becomes painfully clear. This is where the story keeps you on edge, because you can feel that something big is about to happen, something that will change everything once again. And through all of this, David continues to move closer to his destiny. Not quickly, not easily, but step by step. Every struggle, every loss, every decision is shaping him into the leader he is meant to be. But the closer he gets, the more it feels like the final cost is approaching. By the end of this section, the story reaches a point where nothing can go back to the way it was. The war has taken its toll. The betrayals have left their mark. And both David and Saul are standing on the edge of something final. The only question now is, when everything finally collapses, who will be left standing? And this is where everything finally begins to reach its breaking point. The war is no longer building in the background, it is now front and center, unavoidable and relentless. Every side is moving, every force is colliding, and the story starts pushing toward a conclusion that feels both inevitable and devastating. Because at this stage there is no more waiting. The moment of reckoning has arrived. David, now stronger than ever, is no longer just reacting to what is happening around him. He is becoming a key part of how everything unfolds. His presence alone starts to shift the balance, and the victories he gains begin to send a clear message. He is no longer the man running from a king, he is the man rising to replace one. But even in this rise, there is no sense of peace, because every victory carries a cost, and every step forward brings him closer to a loss he cannot avoid. At the same time, the world around him is changing rapidly. The war spreads beyond just David and Saul, pulling entire armies into conflict. This is where the scale of the story becomes truly massive. It is no longer personal, it is a battle that will decide the fate of nations. And right in the middle of it, we see how fragile everything really is. One wrong move, one moment of hesitation, and everything could collapse. Meanwhile, Saul's final chapter begins to unfold. His journey, which started with power and promise, now feels like it is heading towards something tragic. There is a sense that he is running out of time, running out of control, and running out of options. And that creates an emotional weight that is impossible to ignore. Because no matter how far he has fallen, this is still a king, a father, a man who once had everything. And this is where the story delivers some of its most heartbreaking moments. Because the consequences of this war are not limited to just one person. The people closest to Saul, the ones who stood beside him, are now caught in something they cannot escape. The battlefield does not choose sides when it comes to loss. And as everything unfolds, we begin to see just how heavy the cost of this conflict truly is. At the same time, David is forced to confront the reality of what lies ahead. Becoming king is no longer a distant idea. It is right in front of him. But instead of feeling like a victory, it feels like a burden. Because to reach that throne, he must walk through the aftermath of everything that has been lost. And that is what makes his journey so powerful. It is not about taking power, it is about carrying it. As the final battles approach, the tension reaches its peak. Every storyline, every conflict, every decision begins to come together. You can feel that the end is near, and yet it does not feel simple. It feels heavy, emotional, and unavoidable. The kind of ending that changes everything, not just for the characters, but for the entire story itself. By the end of this section, one thing becomes absolutely clear. This is not just the climax of a season. This is the fall of one king and the rise of another. And as that transition begins to take shape, the story prepares us for its most powerful and emotional moments yet. Because what comes next will not just decide who wears the crown. It will define what that crown truly means.